Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Who is awake? I didn't see a few hands in the back. That's troublesome. Oh, there it is. It finally came up. Well, as the old song says, we got a long way to go and a short time to get there. We got a lot of material to cover this morning, so I'm going to step right through this stuff. The chief and I have some interesting things to give you at the end of this. So I'll step through the more mundane things first, and then we'll get into the meat of it. All right, next slide. Next one. Has anybody looked at a calendar recently?
No.
What is the next year coming up? 2020. Never thought I'd see it, to be honest with you, but it's here. It's amazing how quickly things are changing. And despite what we may think from time to time, our program is changing as well, and where it's not changing, it probably should be changing. Because our requirements are changing, our capabilities are changing, equipment's getting better, our skills are improving, and our customers at the DoD are demanding different things from us than what they used to. Many of you in this room have been in the program longer than I have, and you can remember when it was primarily a health, welfare, and morale-based radio system. And that was the original purpose because that was the need at the time. Things have changed now. We have alternative means of communications which are more cost-effective, more reliable, and so forth. So we're off to other things. Okay, how about the next one? These are the governing documents that we operate the MARS program under. The Army is basically under the same general series of documents. I highlighted the top two because they're particularly relevant to part of today's discussion. And the Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff memo there is the one that actually establishes MARS and gives us our missions. And then the next one is the one that allows the armed forces to use civilian personnel, volunteer personnel, in support of the MARS program. And if you look over on the right-hand side, the rest of this is interesting, but the right-hand side is, as a result of this, that's what we do. We provide contingency radio to the DoD. We provide international humanitarian assistance to combatant commands. Contingency communications to DSCA. Anybody know what DSCA means? You got it. And provide morale and welfare communication support to deployed DoD personnel. That's still in there. And that's still part of our job, although we're not called on to do it too terribly much. The MARS radio folks would differ with me because a percentage, about how much of your calls are morale-based?
Probably 15, 20%.
15 or 20% of the thousands of phone patches they make per year. So it's still there. Next. So let me give you folks a few reminders here. Anytime there's some kind of civil disaster of any kind of magnitude going on, my phone and my email box blows up with, why aren't we participating? How can I do something on this hurricane or this earthquake or whatever the case may be? I want to remind you that except as provided in this executive order here, Air Force MARS is not normally involved in civil support matters. There are other people who are more appropriately tasked for that, such as, anybody give me an example? Ares, RACES, how about on the government side? Shares, that's what Shares was put together for. Consequently, our mission has kind of shifted away from there. If such support is provided, we at headquarters will issue your region MARS director or state MARS director specific tasking, which has been cleared through the DOD. There are certain legalities involved involving Title 10 and Title 32, which I'm not going to go into here. It's not really relevant to this discussion. But you need to be aware they exist, because from time to time you'll hear these terms in conversations. And they're very important, and they govern what we do. Under no conditions should you ever self-deploy or volunteer Air Force resources to a civil disaster without authority to do so. At one point we had quite a few call signs out there that were assigned to civilian agencies like emergency management, state police, so forth, so on. Through attrition, those have pretty much all expired. What was left, we revoked, and we have encouraged those people to move over to shares, which is where the umbrella they really belong under. So that's what they've done. And so we're out of that business. If you feel a need, an overwhelming urgency to get involved in something, feel free to do so, but use your amateur call sign, not your MARS call. And I certainly can't, in the program, can't tell you what to do, except don't use your MARS call. Next. Nets and net control stations. Nets are a key tool that we use mainly for these purposes right here. We move traffic, and for the operator's point of view, we want technical and procedural proficiency. And for anybody that's ever been in the training business, how do you achieve proficiency? Anybody? Yeah, practice, and that's what we have nets for. I have a long list of SMDs sending me bitch mails that they can't get enough people to man the nets that are scheduled. This is not a new problem. This is a consistent problem that's been around for quite a number of years.
Oh, yeah.
All right? I don't know what it is why members won't step up and play net control station. I realize that the first time you do it, particularly if you're a new member, it's a bit daunting and it makes you a little bit nervous, and you're asking yourself, am I going to screw this up? So what? The way you learn, how do you learn? You make mistakes, you do it better the next time. Nobody's going to crucify you. Just step up and do it. And, well, except for Larry, maybe. You know, the old 80-20 rule that applies in a lot of volunteer organizations works out here. About 20% of the members do 80% of the work when it comes to net control. That's just totally unacceptable, folks. The main reason is those 20% of the people get tired. They're there week after week after week. They need some relief. They want to go on vacation. They have things to do with their families. This may not be their entire life. So I urge you to get your respective members, or if you're a member yourself, step up and volunteer to be a net control station. Just do it once and try it. And you'll find that it's not as daunting as you think. If you're not willing to do that, you ought to ask yourself why you're a member. Being a net control station is just part of proficiency. Because in a bad day scenario, an emergency, the regular net control station may what? Not be there. So you may get called on. So I don't know about you, I'd like to have had a little practice. And last but not least, participation is required in the MARS operating instruction, both as a participant in nets and as a net control station. So while we don't enforce it per se, it is a requirement. Next, sir. Talk about logging and reporting of your time. Another consistent area of problems. The chief made this as simple as it could possibly be and still be compliant with the information that he needs. A couple of years ago, we went to self-reporting. Does everybody remember that? That relieved a huge paperwork burden on you as the member, your state director, your region director, the national people, and now we're down to an electronic format, and we still have problems. Don't forget, there's a whole section in the MOI that requires you to keep track of your time and report it accurately. Those figures are used in reporting purposes up to the DOD. And it's part of our justification for the program. You know, we stand over here and say, look at all we do for the DOD, and the DOD says, prove it. So the chief needs numbers to back up what he's doing. We as a program, and me personally, expect you to be honest when it comes to reporting your time and ethical. If you did it, report it. If you didn't, don't. If you miss a month and you don't get your time, you're not going to get tossed. Everybody made a good college try, but you might have missed a month or two. And I would encourage you that if you've got circumstances going on in your life where you can't participate at your usual level, talk to your SMD and explain to them what's going on and ask for a little relief. And I've got several SMDs sitting here, and they're sitting here nodding their heads. So just keep them in the loop. They'll work with you. We need you as a member. Don't forget, reports for the month are due no later than the 5th day of the next month, because they in turn have to roll those up and report those up to national record keeping. Per the MOI, we're authorized for random audits. Last year we audited approximately 3% of the membership, and that consists of requesting your log. And if you'll know it if you ever get it, because it's a fairly official looking email from Charlie Hopkins on my staff, and it says, please supply your logs from this period to this period. I'm very happy to report to you that the logs we saw were approximately 95% accurate. So, yes, sir.
Good question. Do you think you'll ever get to a point where we do online reporting versus either over the air or emails or anything like that?
Well, the answer to that is we have the capability to do that now, but we're encouraging you to send these over the air for what reason?
Practice.
Back 2 slides, proficiency.
Yeah.
Yep. I realize it's not the most efficient way to do it. Okay, fair enough? All right, next slide. The new MOI revision is now in release status. I expect that to be distributed next week. That'll go to the region MARS directors, who will in turn distribute it to the state folks, and will distribute it to the membership. I highly recommend that when you get that, you take a look over it. There are some notes in the front that say what the release changes are, but they're not all inclusive. So pay particular attention to the areas of time reporting and accounting. And there are a few other things which I think you'll find pretty interesting. But we've changed up some time classifications to primary and secondary duty. And there are some pretty important changes, so read that stuff over. Next. There is more than a request, it's a requirement that Army and Air Force MARS collaborate, coordinate, and cooperate. And we have been pushing this for several years now quite heavily. I think many of you have stood here and listened to me before and at other venues, and I always tell you that we're partners with the Army and they're partners with us. There's no them and us. Although we have our individual identities, the DOD looks at us as the MARS program. And they really don't care whether the traffic comes off the Army or off. They don't care. They just want their information. And the point of this is we've modified standard operating procedures. We've modified some of ours. The Army has modified some of those to make them as close to parallel as we can. Yes, there are differences remaining, and they do things a little differently than we do, but at the end of the day, it's close enough that we can get our traffic through. And we specifically, how many people have heard of an RJ MOG? An RJ MOG, regional joint. And RJ MOG is a good place to cross-pollinate with the Army. So not only is it a necessity, it's also a requirement. So I really encourage you to reach out and make friends with your Army counterparts, get to know who they are. I will tell you that you are fully authorized to operate on any Army frequencies, and they are fully authorized to operate on ours. You just have to use the appropriate call sign. So if you have Army stations that show up on your net, that's not only legitimate, it's encouraged. So there you go. Next. As of just a few days ago, we had 944 active members on the rolls and approximately 90 additional emeritus members. Who knows what an emeritus member is? Tell me.
Somebody has been in for 15 years and has a special status with a special call sign with a Zulu in it.
What's the call sign for emeritus members?
Alpha Foxtrot Zulu.
Zulu. They end in Zulu. An emeritus member is exactly as he said, a senior member with that meets certain requirements, who can no longer, for any number of reasons, make the regular reporting requirements, but we're still proud of their past service and like to have them remain in the program. And this is the way that the Air Force program recognizes them.
Hey, Mark, can I just say
Certainly,
so,
absolutely.
On the emeritus status, I know we released it a couple of years ago, and I think some people misconstrued what the purpose of that was. So we kind of put a suspense. We held it off until the new guidelines. We kind of tightened them up, and it is a badge that people wear, but we really don't. If you can continue to operate and meet all the MOI requirements, you really shouldn't be getting a Z designator, an AFZ call sign. It really is for those folks who just can't participate. I can't give you any money. I can add zeros to your pay, but it was a way to continue to honor the service, because we've got folks been in 50, 60 years, and I just didn't want to kick you out of the program because you couldn't meet all the requirements. Whether you moved into a facility that didn't allow you to have something, you're still a member of the program. And that was really the whole premise of the program, was to honor those folks that met those requirements. So we wanted to tighten that up. We had from an AFA to AFZ, so you had as many different call signs as we could do. You met the thing and did that. I will tell you though something, just to capitalize on something. This week I was at the DoD HF conference, and one of our oldest, anybody know how old the oldest Mars member is? Active Mars member?
104.
104 years old.
Oh my God.
I talked to him this week. Up until recently, he was on the net the morning that I called him. And up until just recently, he was doing all digital stuff. He said, I'm a little tired now, a little hard for me to get on my computer, so he's not doing digital stuff here. But I constantly hear people say, I'm too old, I can't learn that. Marvin Bernstein was on on D-Day invasion in Normandy. He's 104 years old, and he was operating in digital up until just recently. And he doesn't have an AFZ call sign. So I just want you to say, I hear this. I know it's challenging, but if Marvin can do it, I think anybody else can do it. So, but there are some folks whose lifestyle or whatever going, and we'll consider them for that. So I just wanted to put that mark on that, on what that's for, because there's no money to give you pay, and it's a volunteer organization. But I didn't see any value in saying, well, you can't participate, you're no longer in. So you're in emeritus status. We recognize all your contributions. You can contribute when you can. Great. So foot stomping on that. So
Thank you.
But Marvin was a great guy, so it was amazing.
We attrit or lose about 4% of our membership per year. Here are the top 3 reasons that are cited when people leave the program. Sickness, or unfortunately their death, is the number 1. Relocation to someplace they can't operate, like an old folks home or a restricted apartment or subdivision. And then last but not least is changes in lifestyle. New family members, they got to take care of their parents now, you name it. I've heard it all. The reason I put this up here is because to keep the ranks even, how many people do we need to recruit a year?
4%.
A minimum of about 4%. Okay? So roughly 40 people a year. That seems like a pretty modest task considering how many hams there are in the country. So if every single one of you recruited 1 new member a year and got them through training and signed up and working, we would be halfway there because there's over 20 people in this room. Next. So for decades, when I go back and look through and read through MARS history, MARS was on the leading edge of all kinds of technical experimentation and whatnot. There's a book I'm going to give away after a while. It's called An Unofficial History of Army Mars at Age 90. And if you read this book, and if you get it, I advise that you do, there is a lot of information here on how Mars was on the leading edge of teletype operations and lots of older technology. We're not hardly there anymore. We're more a consumer of technology than we are an inventor of it. But one of the reasons we each got into amateur radio was for what? Experimenting.
Playing around.
There was a time, and I realize times have changed, talking about the calendar, people used to build all their own equipment. And that seldom happens anymore, but that's what I'm talking about here. Next. In case you haven't figured it out, Mars is digital these days. Yes, we have SSB nets. We got a lot of them. And we do a lot in SSB. Ask the Mars radio folks. They're 100% SSB operation. But when it comes to moving traffic, folks, what do we use? Digital. We're digital. And we're encrypted digital on top of it. And that isn't just because we enjoy it. It's a requirement of our customer. So when you're out talking to these people about joining the program, what's one thing you need to tell them? You need a computer and you need to know how to use it. It's a digital world. Next. So I've approved all these modes of operation. The Army doesn't allow you that flexibility. They have one and one only. Which one is it? M110A. That's it. The chief has directed me to put these in here as approved modes because he feels like experimentation is important, number 1, and number 2 is if we have a worst day scenario and M110A is not working right for some reason, you have options. Okay? So anything you see from me on an official document is going to say M110A. I'm mandated to do that. I don't have a choice. However, these are codified in the MOI that you can use them. All right, now obviously we can use HF radio, VHF, ALE, and WinLink. Let me just stop right there. We moved the WinLink gateway stations over to shares this past year. And the reason why is because we did not have enough gateway stations to really have an efficient network. And the shares folks have a very extensive network. So Ross Merlin came to the chief, Ross runs the shares program, and said, hey man, we'll suck up your few stations that you got, make them part of our network and improve our network efficiency and give your folks something to do. And that's exactly what we did, and it seems to have worked out pretty well. With that said, if some of our stations still want to use WinLink between stations, that's perfectly legal. Okay, it's not prohibited. Next. So this just reiterates what I've already talked about, interoperability between us CAP, shares, and a number of other people. It's here and it's here to stay. All right? That's what we talked about. Encryption. We supply you with an encryption program and keys to use it. Please use it. If you're not familiar with OPSEC and OPSEC violations, you need to read up those portions of the MOI that deal with OPSEC violations. I will tell you right now, I'm not an OPSEC expert. 99% of that stuff is common sense. Okay? There are a few gotchas in there. While I'm on this, there are two programs that you have to comply with on a 24-month rotating basis. What are they? You personally.
Online training.
Online training for what? Cyber awareness and PII, personally identifiable information. These are online courses which are maintained by the DoD, and we have a mandate that each and every member will have had those courses within every 24-month cycle. It is your responsibility or your members' responsibility to get those done and provide evidence that they've done that. Okay? There are certain exceptions to the rule. If you're a government employee, for instance, you get it anyway as part of your job. All we need is some kind of evidence that you've done it. And other than that, that's about it as far as exceptions go. Any questions on PII? Okay, all new members.
I got a foot stomp on that because I get beat up on that. Now, what I will tell you is the Army doesn't require that. I think they're going to do that, but within the Air Force, I just get my chain of command foot stomped it. We used to have an annual requirement. I tried to relax it a little bit. You know, I mean, I have to take it every year. I take that. For me to just get on the internet, I have to be able to do that. But you know, that's a foot stomp. I realize when you're coming from a non-.mil domain, a little bit more cumbersome at times depending on how you get there or what your browser is, whether it's Chrome or Google or Firefox, but there are some workarounds and we can get that. So please continue. That's a must do for us. So I just wanted to make sure you understood that. So
okay, there have been some technical glitches in the program. I just want to let you know, I don't run those programs.
DISA does?
DISA runs them, and most of those glitches revolve around the ability to print a certificate when you're complete. Consequently, we recommend that people take a screenshot of it before they try and print it, because sometimes it blows up and then you have no evidence, and the only way to get it is to do what? Do it again. Which, I don't know about you, I could probably use the practice, but I don't want to. All right. We changed the MOI so that all new members that come in through training must complete that prior to assignment of a permanent call sign. So one way or the other, by hook or crook, everybody's got to have it. You just heard the chief. Next. All right. AX25 packet is legal, and we have several national VHF frequencies for you to operate on. And all you got to do is look at your national frequency matrix. They're on there. They're delineated. For those of you that aren't familiar with packet, it's a really inexpensive data mode. TNC controllers are available for $100 nowadays. And have at it if that's what you want to do. Next. So here's some examples of things we do. I'm kind of preaching to this choir because everybody here probably knows this. We support the DoD not only through operating nets and whatnot, but we provide training through our base support teams and certain other groups to active duty military people. We support various customers with DoD on using over-the-air testing. Approximately how many of your calls are radio test? Radio checks?
Probably 30%, 40%.
Mars Radio, thousands of calls a year. 30% are for technical reasons, radio checks. It's so many that we've set up another network, and I'm going to tell you about that in just a minute. Here's these base support teams we were talking about. And then multi-mode digital training to teach people about digital technology. Believe it or not, guys, we're probably further ahead of the curve than most government people when it comes to digital communications on radio. Okay? Like a lot of things on the planet nowadays, the generation that's operating this equipment are box changers. And if it doesn't plug together using pre-made cables to pre-built boxes using preloaded software, they can't do it. So we're getting into helping them out. Yes, sir.
Mark, is there any talk about us going to M110B? Or can the MS and DMT do that?
It cannot currently, and the B version, if we had software to support it, we would be able to do that. But currently we don't, that's approved for us. But everybody's aware of it. We know M110B is out there. Next one. There are a lot of events every year. I have people come up to me at these meetings and say, I get tired of sitting on a net listening to static. I don't have anything to do. That's just BS. You got more opportunities than you can shake a stick at. All you got to do is take advantage of them. We publish these things. We've got inter-service operations, COMEXs. Shares has exercises. The Civil Air Patrol, the National Guard, everybody's got exercises going on. We try and publicize those. There was just one a couple of weeks ago. National Weather Service, National Hurricane Center. My fault, it was a little bit of a short notice on it, but I didn't get the bulletin till late, but that should have made it out to you.
And that's my fault because I didn't get till late, but that's all right.
And it was delayed another day because I didn't pick it up till the next day.
There you go. Next one.
When do we get shit late?
Pretty picture there. Next.
That's bureaucracy for you.
I talk about Herman.
Yeah.
Next one. Let's talk about shares. Through a joint agreement with shares, as a MARS member, you are automatically eligible to become a shares member. You are not automatically a member. I want to make that clear. You've got to fill out shares form 1, their application form, and send it in. Okay? Now there's a whole magic in the background that you never see, that when that is sent in, the shares program office contacts us and we verify that you're a member. That always happens within 24 hours and then they do their thing. All right? I encourage you to become part of the shares program as a participant. It's a good program, little different slant than what we do. It's distinctly non-military, and if that appeals to you, have at it. Shares has their own series of exercises. They run their own nets every week. So I'm back to what I said before about BS if you got nothing to do. It's nothing to do if you don't want to do it. Next. There's some experiments going on. One is with WWV. They put some data on WWV back in May. 24th of June, there's supposed to be another one, and then additional broadcast as they are appropriate. And here's the concept over here. At 10 minutes after the hour, you know how they put the weather on at, what is it, 16 after, I believe? Well, we've got 2 slots on here, one at 10 and one at 50, and there'll be static informational messages on there. And where this goes in the future is hard to say. It's an experiment to see if the process will work. And if it does, we'll figure out what to do with it.
Does that also share with shares?
Yes, as far as I know it is.
Well, the big thing right now so right now it's free for us for this test. At some point there'll probably be a charge for us to do that. I mean, it's expensive to operate WWV. Can't think of the gentleman that was at at Dayton Hamvention, the guy that was
Put this
responsible
together.
for that, I had his name in my head, I slept since then, but he was talking about that, but it was very interesting what they were saying, because you might have heard that looked like WWE was going to go away, they didn't get any funding and all that. Well, one of the things that came up, they said, was during the shutdown of the government last year, there was they put Coast Guard members on hiatus and not paying them and all that. Well, one of the things that didn't get shut down during that was WWV, and I don't know that that's what that means, but you can take away with what you want, but obviously it was important enough that they didn't shut it down during the government shutdown. So I don't foresee that going away, but right now it was a good thing for them to let us do that. We're going to see how well that works for those national broadcasts, but it was a good deal.
Next slide, please. Next. For those of you that complain that we don't have any nets, just take a look at the list. Every day we got region traffic nets. We got administrative nets for the states every week. Here for me in this region, it's on Saturday. Transglobal nets, Mars Radio running 24/7, 365, military support net daily, training nets daily, emergency nets. We got quarterly exercises, and then of course actual incidents. And then we got regional joint service interoperability, or RJ-MOG nets, which runs daily. So you got lots and lots and lots of nets. Next. If you're so inclined and you have both the time and facilities, talk to this man right here. He runs this net. Used to be called the phone patch net, now referred to as Mars Radio, which is a collective radio call. If you listen to their channels, you'll hear aircraft calling what?
Mars Radio.
Mars Radio. Okay, and at this point, they got customers from everywhere. If it's DOD or closely related, like the Coast Guard, everybody's using this thing. It's a hell of a task to keep this thing staffed 24/7. It requires a lot of people and equipment. Okay, here's a few fun facts. Well over 2,000 phone patches last year, 200 a month. 60% official business. Okay, it's an interesting concept and it's working well. So if you're looking for a specialty niche to get into, talk to Richard. Next. The military support net was created in 2018 by the chief and myself as a result of a mission change for what used to be known as the mission support net for many years. And without going into all the whole details here, I will tell you the primary purpose of this is to meet an upsurge of requests that headquarters is seeing from field units who say, we're out trying to train our regular reserve and other people, and we don't have anybody to talk to. And apparently the HF Global system discourages a lot of chit-chat. They're more all business kind of things, so they're looking for a place to be able to test antennas and test propagation and so forth. So we put this together in response to that, what we saw as an upcoming need, and that thing is being put together right now. It's technically it's operational, but it's got pretty limited coverage. And the plan currently is initially we're going to plan to have standing nets on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, which is when most of the Guard and Reserve unit activity takes place. All right, next. So we do have a radio station at the Pentagon. It's a nice station. I'm not sure how much it's on the air. I have talked to it a couple of times with various different operators, but just be aware we've got that, and if you hear Alpha Golf Alpha 3 Delta Charlie, you know where it's coming from. Next. We have a developing program which is really exciting. The 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, also known as the Hurricane Hunters, has been a customer of Mars Radio for a while, and And through several people's efforts, Rich Courtney, who is a retired naval weather meteorologist with aviation and ship weather, kind of came forward with this idea, and to make, without going into the details, it's gained quite a bit of traction. This experiment is being observed by the command staff at the 53rd, and they're currently making some modifications to their aircraft in the form of software so that we can exchange data messages. Their primary mode of communication for uploading this hurricane data is via satellite, but we are told that they have an inordinate number of problems with their satellite links, and they really need a way to get this data in a data format back to the land-based station. So this is a really good opportunity for us. We are currently experimenting with them right now. The results aren't in yet, but this has the possibility to be another very interesting net if you're interested in that sort of thing. Personally, I think I'm intrigued with what these guys do. I think they're nuts flying into hurricanes in airplanes, but it's important work and we need to support it. Next. All right. A number of years ago, some ideas were floated concerning the future of the Air Force Mars program. And there was a lot of discussion that took place among a working committee of our peers about what should and shouldn't be done with the program and so forth. That resulted, after almost a year and a half's worth of work by this group, in a series of recommendations that went to the chief, and then I'm going to let him explain to you what the process was after that. Next slide. We're gonna have a new and retooled program starting on January 1st, 2020, and we're going to explain to you today the basics of it. You're going, between now and the end of the year, you as a member and as a leader, depending, will get a series of documents that explains what we're doing and the process and how we're doing it. But it's some really significant changes. Next slide. I'd like the chief to step up here and talk a little bit about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Boy, that slide looked like it's going away. Didn't it look like we're going to blow it up and we're not going to have it? Well, that's kind of a misnomer here. We are going to have an Air Force Mars program. What I will tell you is that the DoD, I've briefed my staff. I am the staff. I briefed myself. No, I've told my leadership that we were going to go through this thing, and we've been working on this for getting close to 2 years on where we're going. So if you look at that, I'm going to read the individual things, but one of the things is, when I explain the Mars mission to Air Force leadership, there's no direct correlation of what we do at the region, what we do at the state, how we're structured, because we're structured like a volunteer radio organization, like a bunch of ham folks. And it doesn't get, they're like, that's great. They don't get it. They don't understand it. Yeah, it's the Air Force Mars amateur guys doing the things that they do. So we looked at, what do we need to do to make us look like an auxiliary, a military organization, a military volunteer organization, and so that we can explain what we do and why we do it and what we do. So you got the Civil Air Patrol that's is structured under a military construct. You've got the Coast Guard Auxiliary, and then you got Air Force Mars that's just kind of out there, that doesn't look like an Air Force, doesn't look like a military organization. So we broke everything down. We looked at where we're at. How can we restructure so we have that Air Force and that Air Force military sent to us? And I think that's a good thing. with that, we looked at, it goes back to the 80-20 piece that Mark talked about. 20% of the folks doing 80% of the, and I looked, if you go back and look at the last time we redid the MOI, we used to have a whole separate division structure, and that was an extra set of folks between me and the operators. So we said, hey, we need to do that. We were top heavy with chiefs and not enough Indians. And with this reorganizational structure, we said, we looked at how many billet positions we have, and what is the number of those that are empty continuously. There's always going to be empty slots, but we looked at how can we reorganize. Is there efficiency with some of the billet positions we have, or can we consolidate some of those duties because they have a like and similar responsibility. So we took our time, we looked, we talked. Reorganizing an MOI takes a long time, and putting this together takes a long time. So we're gonna have a new scent, a new Air Force Mars scent. We're gonna look and have the feel of a military volunteer organization. We're not gonna have uniforms. We're not gonna have ranks. We're gonna have positions and titles that are military in construct, so that when I talk to the leadership, they get an understanding of what we do and why we do it. So I think that's a great way to start this off.
Thanks, Chief. I'm going to take you through a few examples and raise the curtain a little bit on what we're talking about here. Yes, sir, absolutely.
So I'm sorry. I did brief this at the DoD HF conference. I kind of skipped over it because I was limited on amount of time. But here's the thing. You are the first Mars members to know about this. We've held this, I was kind of amazed at how long we've been working with this, and it hadn't got out that this was going on. I was kind of surprised, but it was a real close hold number of folks. So this is the first group of Mars members. Army Mars knows, Paul English knows about it, but he doesn't know really what the construct is. But you're the first ones that are going to see these slides outside of the working group that put it together.
So just a few high points off of this, and we'll move on to the specifics. One of the things the chief asked us to look at was streamline the number of reports to get some better efficiency. We looked at every single process and piece of paper that we currently generate. And when I say paper, euphorically email as well. The fact is, our mission has changed since the Vietnam era. We talked about it earlier. Okay? We're an Air Force auxiliary. It's right in our title. Agreed? We ought to act like one. So a significant number of positions are duplicated between the region and the state level. And our leadership is constantly observing that they're overwhelmed by what they have to do, and they have ineffective span of control. Too many things to watch and not enough time to do it as a volunteer. Next slide. So the region concept basically goes away. There was a region concept to match up with the FEMA regions, and since we're a national organization, it's CONUS, we're not really tied specifically to regions anymore. So your call sign will still have one of the old region numbers in it, but we're really not going to be referring to regions as regions anymore. They have a new name. Next slide. How many people in here were in the military? Nearly everybody. So you'll recognize what an A1, an A2, and an A3 are, won't you?
Yep.
Okay. And I realize this is an eye test if you're back more than three rows back. So an A1's in charge of manpower personnel. This is standard military nomenclature. This is not something we invented. An A2's intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. A3 operations. A4 logistics, plans and requirements, and communications technology. Let me just take let me just take A3 as an example, operations, one I happen to be familiar with. So under the A3 organization, there'll be a limited number of people. There'll be a national operations officer, national emergency operations, transglobal relay, ALE, and maybe some more, okay? Remember, these are just example slides at this particular point. So before I move on to the next slide, is there any question about this part of the organization? This basically represents a reorganization of the Chief's direct report staff. Okay, next. Regions become wings.
Now that makes sense.
So the old Region 1 is now the first wing, and respectively on through the 10 old FEMA regions. And then we've got the 11th wing, which is, these are special missions groups, which contains Mars Radio and Military Support Net. And then we proposed a new 12th wing, who is specifically charged with ALE, J0G, and RJ-MOG operations. The person that occupies the commander of the 12th wing will be our primary interface with the Army when it comes to things like RJ-MOG and all these joint operations. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, the reason I'm asking this is, CAP is arranged by regions of wings, and it's not FEMA. It's not the FEMA regions. The reason that this went this way, was it because of the efficiency of not having to deal with call sign changes?
Well, we're going to talk about call signs in a little bit, but the actual drive.
Are there still state?
Let me get through this,
Okay.
and it'll become more apparent to you. Did you have something?
No, they'll be the wing, but it'll be the first Mars wing, second Mars. They'll have designators on them, so we don't confuse with the active duty, the guard. So there'll be designators, Mars wing 1, wing 2. So it'll be strictly focused on that, so that there's no confusion within the active duty or the reserves or whatever. So.
Okay, next one. So for instance, let's take Region 6 as an example right here where we're sitting. So we got the 6th Communications Wing, Region 6, and then we've got the states become what?
Groups.
Those of you that know military nomenclature, what follows a wing? A group. What follows a group? Squadrons. There you go. So here we go. 61st, 62nd, and depending on how many states are currently in the region is how many groups they'll have. All right. Next. So in the case of special missions, the 11th, they will have 2 what? Squadrons. There you go. It completely meets the military nomenclature layout. So we're hoping that this will allow the Air Force to better understand how we operate. Next one. Here's an example for the 12th, which currently doesn't exist. And once again, squadron, etc. Next one. So here's an interesting factoid for you. How many members do we have? 44. Okay. 292 of those positions are billeted. A third of our entire membership is tied up in management. All right. Let's go to the next slide. Under the new proposal, that number drops to 193. And just for the purposes of illustration, I put eliminated on here on these positions that are eliminated. In most cases, they're renamed or retasked to other things. So anyway, there will be some changes, and that's why this takes 6 months to do it. All right, next. So we were talking about call signs. We've proposed some changes in call signs. For instance, at the national level, we're right here. The members, the AFA call signs they have are unchanged, the AFZs are unchanged, and the AFTs are unchanged. And so that'll keep the change in call sign workload down to an absolute minimum. Okay. So, next slide. At the wing level, this is what they'll look like. The wing commanders will be C's, the deputies will be D's, and then every wing will have some subset of billets. There's an operations person, a records person, an emergency person, a plans person, and a training person. They'll all be the same. So if somebody calls your net and their call sign is AFW2O, who are they? Second wing operations. All right, so there'll be some consistency across the system. Any questions on this?
Great.
Does it make sense? Or are we drinking our own bathwater?
No, I think it's great.
All right, next one. That's it on that.
Way to go, Larry.
I just couldn't pass that one up.
Thank Jody for that. Thanks, Jody.
That's our new recruiting poster.
That was the day you got assigned to the position, not now.
Took that last night.
I considered photoshopping this to put one of those armed robbery tapes like you see on the 7-Eleven door behind it. We'll stop right here because
Thanks.
we've got about 15 minutes left, and I figured that this is going to generate a lot of discussion and questions, what we've just talked about. So this is the primary reason why I really was insistent that the chief try and be here today. So now is your time to fire both rounds up here, and let me remind you of the timeline. Today is step 1 of the timeline. We said we would make a public revelation of this in June. Check your calendar. It's June. There are about 15 steps that have to take place between now and 2020. And some of them have got a lot of homework behind them. But we're well into them. Got a great committee that's working on this. It's only 3 people. And we're making progress. So what you're going to see next is a series of changes that'll come out that are mostly informative at this point. You will see a new rev of the MOI, which will be passed out to you in December of this year and will reflect the nomenclature reorganization changes here. And you'll have that in your hands by January 1st, and you will be expected to have read it by then, and then you'll know what's going on. And then the change will actually take place at 0 Zulu on January 1st. Okay? So we're here. Ask us questions. Chief?
Okay, the first question comes up is related to the one that I asked a little bit earlier. You get to the regions. We got rid of the FEMA-dependent regions.
They're not. They're really not. We're just not calling them regions anymore.
Okay.
They're still associated.
It's still the same
it's
states.
exactly the same makeup of states that fall into it.
Okay.
So it looks like we blew that up, that slide. That's probably a misnomer, but
Go back a couple slides, Larry.
Oh, yeah.
To that state slide.
They're just putting it in Air Force speak so the Air Force people can understand it.
As an example, for this region, it will be, correct me if I'm wrong,
Be the
Chief,
sixth
but it
wing.
will become the 6th
Whoa,
communication
back up,
wing.
down one.
This will be the
One
6th
more.
communication wing.
There it is. It's the old Region 6.
it hasn't changed. It was still associated because that's that's who we interact with. If something happens in Region 6, we want that to be standard, absolutely. So there's no change. That slide indicated we just weren't gonna have the regions anymore. We're gonna call those wings.
Right, okay.
Yes, sir.
Would it be to differentiate between, other military parks, would it be like the 6th Mars?
Everything will have a Mars designator on it so that there's no confusion that associated with other wings and groups that are out there. So that's a must. That has to happen because the 5th Communications Group in Combat Communications Group in Florida, their Combat Com, we do not want to have any type of confusion that this is strictly the Mars wing. And when we ask, we're saying the reason they're numbered that way is to correlate with the FEMA regions, absolutely. So it's just that structure, but everything will have Mars on it. And it'll probably have Air Force, Mars on it. So, so there's no confusion across with the active duty and the guard units. So
How would that be written out? Would that be like Air Force Mars 6?
Air Force Mars 61st Communications Group, Air Force Mars 6th Communications Wing. That is so important to get so that it's like, hey, we have a 6th wing, we have a community. No, we did that to structure. I don't see any pushback on that. So
I have a question. If you're looking like an Army unit, they have like...
We're not Army.
No, I'm just saying, if you look, because I was in the Army. If you look at an Army unit, you got like Company A, 3rd and 10th Infantry.
I don't even understand that.
Okay, the 3rd and 10th Infantry, so here, would you, if you're talking about the whole group as a one address, Air Force Mars, 6th Communication Wing, 6th Communication Mars, 6th, or Mars.
So you'd say if I wanted this, so what you're saying, if I wanted to talk about the state Mars director,
right.
I'd say he's a member of the 6th Communication Wing, 61st Communication Group. That's way too complicated. I don't think we're not gonna break it out like that. No,
okay.
There are specific nomenclature.
Okay.
The 1st to the 45th, or the 2nd, or the 3rd. No.
Yeah. So in other words, the 61st Mars Communication Group is under the 6th.
Underneath that wing.
Right. So we don't have to mention it.
Hell, no.
Right. Okay. That's all I was wondering.
No. It takes too long.
Now it's 6
Yeah.
communication.
Right.
Yeah, we're all about that abbreviation, acronyms and stuff. So.
Okay, so just checking.
No, yeah. You're in the Air Force, Mars.
Okay.
Training will
In
commence
the back,
tomorrow.
Chief. In the back.
Yes.
So, like, if we were talking about the 5th Communications Wing and we were talking about the groups, it would be 51st, 52nd, 53rd?
Exactly.
Correct.
Okay, so you don't have to even say 6th Communication Wing, you can just say, like for Texas, you would just say 65th.
Correct.
Communications Group.
And whoever you're talking to should know you're under the 6th wing.
Right.
And you really probably won't need to, you won't be talking like that. It's just so you know where you're associated. I mean, when you talk that you're in Texas, I don't know how often as a Mars member you say that I'm a Texas Mars member, you give them the call sign and you're good to go. It's just an organizational structure, so we have the look and feel. And it helps explain what we do and how we're aligned. So everybody understands, the 6th wing is made up of Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, So it just that same structure, and we kept that association with under the FEMA region. So it was just a form, fit, and function place. But I think this, does everybody like this? Anybody not like this?
Sounds great.
Good.
I think this is great, and the current Air Force culture likes to think that we're a part of them, and this
makes it easier to show what we do. Correct.
To think of us as a part of them.
Correct. That
really
was it.
help
So
us.
it was when I spoke to my leadership, they didn't understand. So it's easier to explain, and we had that look and feel of a military auxiliary. So if you wanna look like a duck and walk like a duck, you gotta,
I want uniforms. I want uniforms and rank.
Give us some time.
Yeah,
This is a lot to
I will see that,
digest.
Join Cap.
We wanna blend in with the community. We don't want, we want that offset kind of thing.
I agree.
We want- It was funny, I'll tell you, this was kind of funny. So when I talked about this at the DOD HF conference. I had a slide and stuff, and then I was explaining it, and in there I said, no uniforms. I said, and there's probably some of them on the air right now in their pajamas talking on the air, But yeah.
Well, that's a thought I didn't want.
Yes, sir.
I was just gonna say, it's counter to that, that's why I refused to move into Air Force retirement communities. I was sick of uniforms and I was sick of ranks.
There you go. So,
I said,
and we have no ranks or titles, there's no, like the Army, the Civil Air Patrol, they have lieutenant colonels and all that. We're not gonna give that.
I was gonna call you general.
No. Yeah, we're not gonna have that. So we've just got titles that designate who's responsible for the
Just
wing.
like we do now.
Correct, exactly. The region director is the wing commander, so.
I'm sorry, I said here, I'm already answering.
We're just about out of time, and I got one or two housekeeping things to do. Are there any other questions, especially for the chief?
One comment while y'all are both here, so it all comes out of one mouth. Army Mars is not and will not take over Air Force Mars. And if the same people keep coming back and, we're gonna take y'all over, okay? Just see.
Well, here's what I will tell you.
Just go see
That is not going to happen. So when the DOD looks at it, when we're reporting back to the DOD, they see Mars as one component. But so if you look at the DOD instruction, each service is tasked to have a Mars capability. If not, they have to go back to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and tell them why not. So when Navy Marine Corps Mars evolved, they had to go back and say why they didn't. We have an Air Force component. We belong to the Air Staff at SAF A6. They report up to the DOD. So we're specifically tasked to have an Air Force service component. So there's no eating. The Army wouldn't eat. That's not going to happen. I mean, since I've been in this job, every year I have to constantly tell people that is not happening. I don't know who starts those rumors. There's lots of rumors I hear about, and I'm like,
We should start a rumor that we're
no, we're not starting any rumors.
We're taking over Army Mars.
No. Yes,
We
sir.
don't want to take over Army.
Question about the mission support network, this military support network. How do you expect to be advertising that capability throughout the reserves and everything else? Will that be our function, or will it be more through the active chain, or what?
You know what? That's a difficult thing. So what I will tell you is the first thing that came up at the DOD HF conference with Colonel Radegui, who is the ACC A6 commander. He was the host of the DOD HF conference because it fell under HFGCS. And his foot stomp was PACE. Who knows what PACE is for the Air Force? It's primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. And that is where the HF piece falls in for the DOD, that contingency and emergency. That's where our bread and butter is within the DOD. The primary means of communication for the DOD is SATCOM and the internet, IP-enabled infrastructure. That is vulnerable. That is very vulnerable. It is tough for our folks. So the contingency piece here. So when I briefed the Air Force Mars, the Mars program, I highlighted that Air Force Mars is a huge player in that. And we've got to get the word out to those folks about where we fit into the program. So we're going to work on an advertising, word of mouth kind of thing. There's no budget to advertise, but we've got to figure out how to do that. So when I briefed the Mars piece, and when our DOD, the mission that we support, briefed, they specifically called out Air Force Mars and the Mars mission of support. So that's a good thing. So I had folks coming up from the Coast Guard, the guard units, hey, how can we get involved? We didn't realize that it was out there. We don't want to bother. I know Richard will be excited because I think Coast Guard is going to put out an all Coast Guard message about, hey, Coast Guard folks, please use Mars radio. So we'll see what's going on. How much time do we have left?
We're out pretty
We're out
much.
of time.
I got.
So let me,
Go ahead.
So I want to thank Herman and Don for putting the conference together here. It's a big event to put this thing together, so thank you to them.